We know we're living through an AI revolution. We engage with it, consciously or unconsciously, in every aspect of our lives. And this is also true in our courts.
Court is now in session. Please be seated. As your presiding judge today, I am here to ensure that justice is served fairly and without discrimination. In my courtroom, everyone will have the opportunity to speak and be heard. Let us proceed with respect for the law and for one another. The matter before us is important, and I expect all parties to conduct themselves with the utmost professionalism. Let us begin.
Welcome to the second series of the Irish Courts podcast. In this episode, we ask, could or indeed should artificial intelligence be used in our courts? And if so, could we one day see a robo-judge? Dr. Brian Barry, Associate Professor at the School of Law, Trinity College, Dublin.
There's a propensity to think about these big existential questions when we talk about AI, and a drive to consider that massive, big, open question. Well, could we be replaced as judges, as court systems, by technology?
We don't have a robot judge. And in fact, I think the likelihood of us ever having a robot judge in the future is very slim indeed.
Miss Justice Eileen Roberts, Judge of the High Court.
But to answer your question, is AI being used? I think what was a surprise even to some members of the judiciary is that elements of AI are being used. Perhaps not too much by the judiciary, but certainly by the practitioners that are appearing before us. And particularly in relation to legal research and functions on the very well-established legal databases that we have. But for a long time, law firms have been deploying AI on behalf of their clients, particularly in relation to document-heavy transactions or large discoveries, where there are now, because email has come in so many years now, it's not unusual to have a universe of in excess of 1 million documents in the commercial court cases. And of course, that cannot be read in the way that a banker's box of documents used to be read years ago. So AI has to be deployed. These are specialist closed platforms that can be trained to look for relevant documents, and judges are the beneficiary of that then in terms of how cases are presented to them. It has been used very successfully in the European courts to anonymise judgments and to take out all the labour of having to find names and addresses and identifying criteria. So that has happened, and it's really now coming into its own in relation to courtroom translation and transcription of proceedings, and that's something that I think in time will be something that we will look at.
And while to some degree there is technology to assist judges in their work, the way I see it is that we need to think about the lower hanging fruit, because the agenda or the idea is to improve access to justice or improve how courts do what they do. Generative AI and certain types of artificial intelligence could be useful in that regard as an information tool, given the technology that's available to us right now, before we get into jumping off the cliff and thinking about robo-judge.
And what we're doing now is we're at the point of looking at how can we use it, should we use it, what are the problems with it, and in fact just educating ourselves as to what it is at all.
The reality is that in a number of jurisdictions they are beginning to experiment and pilot technologies for assisting judicial decision making. So there's any number of examples of that just starting to pop up around the globe. Whistle-stop tour, I suppose, would be that aside from Compass in the US, there are AI systems being at least piloted, if not integrated, to help with measuring recidivism risk and reoffending in Taiwan and Malaysia. It's used to make recommendations on civil liability in road traffic accidents in Buenos Aires. It's used to weigh up, an interesting example from Spain, to weigh up the prospective risk of individuals perpetrating intimate partner violence. It's used to generate text for draft judgments. in aviation passenger claims in Germany and in so-called simple cases in some provinces in China. Those examples there might sound rather alarmist, but context is important. So you have, for instance, I mentioned the drafting judgments in aviation passenger claims. They are rather rote, repeat types of claims where you'd have thousands of extremely similar cases coming before a particular court in Germany, and generative AI may be useful, properly constrained and built correctly, in helping the judge draft essentially template judgments for them then to formally populate, if you like, and make sure and double check that all of that material is correct. But there is that risk that you slip into as sort of an acceptance that these tools will get it right more often than they get it wrong, or even completely right all of the time. So being on your guard at all stages when you're engaging with these systems, is right the way up from the first-year law student to a Supreme Court judge. It's absolutely critical if we're going to think about this.
There has been cases in perhaps every developed jurisdiction where lawyers are using AI. There have been cases that have come before the courts where there are very obvious errors. And the most common error, in fact, appears to be the quoting of cases that are entirely fictitious, that don't exist at all, that have been made up by Gen AI and are, referred to as hallucinations. And they are appearing and have appeared in legal submissions that have been put before the courts. And of course, they have been found out pretty quickly because, of course, they don't exist. The other thing that happens quite a bit is where the case might exist, but the quotation that comes from it or the interpretation that's given to it is completely erroneous and doesn't actually exist in the real version of the case.
And of course, we've seen these coming up in the news anyway, where judges have lambasted lawyers in court at quite high level in the US, for example.
Karlin, Lillington, writer and retired technology columnist for the Irish Times.
I mean, there just was one with a Puerto Rican judge that fined two lawyers $24,400 for an error-filled court filing in a FIFA case. So this is not like even a minor case. It's a big FIFA case that's happening in Puerto Rico right now. And the judge said that they used AI in that the brief contained at least 55 defective citations. So, I mean, it makes you laugh, but you think 55, like who are the lawyers who are not checking their citations? And that's one of the problems, of course, with AI is that it just comes up with stuff as well. Hallucinating is the term, where they start to imagine they've absorbed all this information and no one really understands why, but they start to just do this sort of riff where they come up with their own ideas. So hence you get these defective citations. They just cite cases that have never happened before. The thing is that it looks and sounds completely legitimate. So there are clearly cautions here.
It is stressed that it's a matter of very significant professional misconduct for lawyers to use generative AI and not check that it is accurate. And then various orders have been made, including referring them to the professional bodies or making wasted costs orders against them. So I think it is something that the professions themselves and the Law Society and the Bar are obviously impressing this on their own members, but it's something we need to look out for, and it is happening and has happened. Yes, absolutely.
Well, this is one of the things about AI that I think is important to keep in mind. There is what we are told it will do by the companies and the individuals who hype it very heavily, which does sound way out there on the science fiction side. The sudden arrival of sentient AI is around the corner, where it's going to be smarter than human and thinking for itself. Set against that is a more conservative view that what we are looking at is machine learning still. It's still machines digesting huge amounts of data and looking at all those pieces in a very, very fast way to come up with the answers that we get out of AI.
generative AI, in fact, has no intelligence. It has no understanding, doesn't know if things are true or not. It is simply interpreting, predicting what the next word should be, and it's trained on data. And the more unreliable the data, the more unreliable the output you're going to get.
An AI, in order to be trained, needs unimaginable amounts of data. Initially, there was an attempt to use only clean data, data that had child abuse images removed from it, for example, really disturbing, violent videos and discussions and extremely racist material, to have all of that removed and cleaned out. But very quickly, these things needed more data, and so they went back and started to use these dirty data sets, these really horrible, polluted data sets full of racist material, violence, misogyny. But even early on, when they were supposed to be using the clean data sets, they were still replicating the kind of biases in society. This is actually probably one of the biggest concerns. We already know, it has been proven over and over in the early systems, and it has not really improved at all, that AI tends to bring together all the biases that are in the data sets that it is fed, taking in biases that are out there in the world generally, making assumptions, wrong assumptions that the more crimes are being committed by certain people of certain ages, certain ethnicities, and then that's being absorbed into a sentencing AI. The fear is that you are just going to duplicate what is already happening in the real world, is that more disadvantaged people of color, tend to be sentenced to harsher terms than people who are of more privileged backgrounds and who are white. So there are so many applications that could create a more equitable world, because you could remove human biases, but right now AI seem to mostly just duplicate human biases, that they mirror them.
One of the most well-known AI sentencing systems is COMPASS. That's the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions, a case management and decision support tool used by some US courts to assess the likelihood of defendants reoffending.
So what has happened with, for example, the COMPASS platform that you mentioned is that is used in the United States particularly as a way of trying to predict whether someone is likely to reoffend within a certain period of time. And that feeds into sentencing and all sorts of other applications. And when that was looked at in detail, it was found to be inherently biased because, of course, it was being trained on data where there was a disproportionate representation of, for example, the black population or certain other populations, and therefore that bias was inherently hot-wired into it. And they do continue to use it, but with a very significant health warning. Its use was upheld by the Wisconsin Supreme Court recently in a case of Loomis.
Eric Loomis, who took a case. He was convicted, sentenced. As part of that process, the judge looked at this sentencing tool, and Loomis's argument was that this is a breach of due process, as they call it in the States, fair trial here, because he wasn't able to look under the hood of that algorithm.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld the legitimacy of the use of the AI sentencing tool,
but on the basis that the risks were spelt out and on the basis that the judge could clearly explain factors other than generative AI, which informed their judgment and decision at the end of the day.
So we can look at this technology from within court systems, but also if we think about how people access legal information, how they run their cases, particularly lay litigants, and a side effect might be that, and I've heard judges express this concern in different jurisdictions, that more people will think that they can make these cases using generative AI as a crutch to advance their claim. There's absolutely nothing wrong in principle with technology being used by people in an access to justice global crisis. There's no denying that. But there is a sense of the unknown and not having any constraints or control over that landscape in the immediate future. How do we help litigants think carefully about their options, the consequences of going through a court process, the realities of their arguments? And of course, traditionally, that's the role of a lawyer. But if legal fees are too expensive, then you can understand the draw to these technologies. And what does that mean for how courts operate and how they navigate the foibles and the complications of ever more overburdened courts with lay litigants that may rely on these tools in ways that aren't helpful to them? That they can be relying on generative AI and over-relying on it to produce documents with arguments they may not understand, with cases to cite that may not even exist. I'm beginning to run experiments with colleagues of mine, a PhD candidate, Chris Green, and a colleague in UCD, Smurfit Business School called Marius Clody, and we're exploring, well, will people trust or deem more or less procedurally fair processes where AI systems are being used by judges, where that system is either developed by a big technology company, by the Department of Justice as a branch of government, or within the courts themselves working with AI developers? So we need to ask these questions. Who builds and controls these systems? You see China going a particular direction with a very different political outlook, of course, where the government is essentially mandating the court system to develop AI tools for decision-making wholesale. It's a government prerogative at the moment. So what does that mean in functioning democracies? Say, if you were to go down that road, how much power do the big technology companies have? How much power does government have and control over those algorithms? And whether there's a residual concern that there's a demise or a whittling away, at least to some degree, of judicial independence.
I don't know, these are extremely difficult questions. And I think that, the bottom line is that nobody really understands how AI works. We don't know how they're developed. We don't know the data sets these systems are trained on. It's all very secretive. There isn't an expert in the world who understands how AIs do what they do, how they think. I hate to even use the term like they and think, because you're talking about machines and algorithms.
Certainly as judges, and certainly speaking personally, I'll never understand how AI works, really. But I think what you can question is the accuracy and the validity of what you are being told is the position. It's funny, when you hear cases a lot, you actually can spot the use of AI more than you think you should be able to. And it's the way things are phrased. The use of a lot of American spellings, for example, is usually a red flag, or things that don't make sense, or things that make incredible sense and you've never heard of them before, but they seem to just deliver an answer that one side it perfectly suits their case. So there's lots of different red flags. I don't think you'll ever understand how it works, but you certainly can question the accuracy of it and question the validity and the accuracy rather than the workings of it.
One of the demands of open justice and a rule of law principle is that there's judicial reasoning. The judgment is the product of the sweat of the judge's brow, that they really deeply consider that range of issues. Any level of integration, and it could be subtle or it could be extremely consequential, that involves AI may represent a kind of a new form of adjudication where there's a concern that legal rules are debased and it becomes an algorithmic exercise, and it may erode confidence in judicial systems' legitimacy.
Nobody can understand how the generative AI is working. You can't take the output and go back step by step to the beginning to work it out. So you cannot easily understand how you got to the decision that you got to. And there's always a difficulty in that. when you're applying it in the legal sphere, because as lawyers we have to be very happy that we start at the basics and we work our way up and we come out at the end with a decision we can justify. And that, I think, is my biggest fear with Gen AI, actually, is that it makes our own brains so lazy that we stop being able to create things from the ground up and reach decisions that are fair and balanced and transparent. I think what AI lacks are the things that make a good judgment. Nuance, context, predicting how is this going to play out in a slightly different scenario that may have totally the law of unintended consequences. The possibility for that is always huge when you make a judgment. And AI just will not have any of that ability, let alone the sort of empathy or the practical reality of how things are going to play out. So those are areas where I see it being really of no assistance at all to us in terms of judgment making.
This is kind of already happening. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. And if the research community is finding that, people simply aren't trusting it, or people simply don't find that that's procedurally fair, apply the handbrakes. Stop. Go back to what you were doing. Otherwise, the project of justice, if not collapses, significantly weakens. Going forward, what you simply need to think about is taking a beat, taking a moment, and sitting everyone around the table and considering what's an appropriate use case for this technology, and getting developers, computer scientists, talking to judges, talking to experienced litigation practitioners, talking to court users about what should guide these systems. That bridge to the technical solution is what's critical.
It's hard to see how you would put in the checks and balances that we need. And I think that's going to be a huge challenge for both the industry, for society, and for a lot of these applications over time. In terms of regulation, what is out there, the EU tends to be leading on it right now. It already has its EU AI Act, which as of August of last year, 2024.
The EU AI Act is the world's first comprehensive regulation on artificial intelligence. It takes a risk-based approach, meaning the higher the potential harm an AI system could cause, the stricter the rules it must follow. Under the Act, any AI classified as high risk will have to comply with stricter rules and assessments.
Judicial activities are deemed to be very high-risk activities from an AI perspective for obvious reasons. Every government is looking at regulating it, and the difficulty with legal regulation, of course, of areas such as AI, and we can see it with social media, for example, the laws are slow and they're difficult to catch up and they're difficult to change. And all of this AI is developing at such a pace and such a speed that really all we can do in terms of regulation is to try and create broad principles and guidelines. There are no formal rules, but in recognition of the existence of particularly generative AI, a group of judges got together and prepared guidelines for the judiciary on the use of generative AI. And they are very high-level guidelines, very similar to what other jurisdictions have brought in. And I suppose the important point is they don't ban the use of generative AI, but what they do very much do is alert judges to the risks associated with AI, and also very much say AI is not to be used for any analysis or finding information that you can't otherwise verify or know to be true.
The pace of development and the widespread use of AI continues to raise new considerations and questions for the legal world.
So there's environmental elements as well. which raises questions as well. If, as part of normal legal practice, if you're always going to be asking AI questions, well, asking an AI a question versus doing it just on normal, DuckDuckGo or Google has 10 times more of an environmental impact in terms of the energy that's required. So, if you're trying to do all this grunt work, it's having a significant environmental impact because it's so demanding in computing power to do this. Computers have to be cooled when they're running, so it draws down more energy from the grid to power the computers. And also, of course, they use significant water for that cooling. So there's a lot of pieces to this that kind of stay hidden. People don't think about. When you go in and you ask a quick question on ChatGPT or you're having fun with it, you're not really thinking, oh, well, that just had this major environmental impact.
Apart from the types of use of AI in courts, which we have already touched upon, the use of AI can present challenges as to how to apply the existing laws to new scenarios.
So there are definitely lots of challenges with new types of legal action that AI is going to give rise to. The existing IP, intellectual property law, generally around copyright and so on, that is really being rewritten as we speak in terms of AI, because it's not clear who owns the output from generative AI. So if an image is generated, but it has been trained on other images that were generated by people who owned copyright in those images, then what happens with that? Who's liable for it if it's wrong or it causes a loss to somebody else? There's an ongoing case in both the US and the UK where Getty Images that have all the stock photos, they're suing Stability AI because they say they have used millions of their photographs to train their AI platform, which produces images. They're claiming a huge amount of money in revenue they say they've lost and various breaches of IP. That's a challenge to the courts in terms of new types of cases. The other big challenge, I think, is going to be around deep fakes and really understanding when something is produced to you as evidence. Is it evidence? Is it real? Is it accurate? I think challenges that we really haven't seen. And it particularly can arise in criminal cases where, of course, there's an even greater imperative on making sure that people are convicted on the basis of genuine evidence. There are challenges. There are no doubt there are challenges. And certain things can become accepted without them being true. They're then repeated, and their acceptance increases and increases, but they don't become any more true because they keep being repeated. And that's the risk and challenge for us. But you have to be able to ask the right questions to get an answer that is more likely to be accurate than inaccurate. And that really is, I think, the change in how lawyers are interacting with AI. In the older days, the good lawyers were the ones who knew the answers. And now I think the younger lawyers particularly are going to be the ones who know how to ask the right questions and give the right prompts to AI so as to maximise the value of the output that comes from their engagement with it. There may well be smaller, more routine type cases where there are very limited variables, and perhaps AI could give people a quick decision and an easy decision. And maybe if that was ultimately appealable to a human being, that would be something that could work very well and is working in some respects in administrative bodies as well as in lower courts where there may be multiple applications of similar sorts.
And there's a provocative article by an academic called Eugene Volokh who asks, well, if these systems can provide written material that is as persuasive as a human's judgment written out, then we should, in principle, consider it. And the rebuke to that is, where's the dignity in that? Where is that sense that someone who comes to court, which will generally be one of the worst days of their life, feels that they are at the mercy of a computer system, rather than them being able to look a judge in the eye or a panel of judges in the eye and feel that catharsis of coming to court and feeling heard. But it's about the dignity of the process and feeling that it is procedurally just.
I think the idea of dignity is hugely important. Law it's not just about the application of logic in a way that is devoid of human understanding or human content. People need to be heard. They need the dignity of somebody listening to them, somebody taking account of what they've said. And time and again, we've learned that people have a sense of satisfaction with the justice system if they feel they were heard. We do, under our Constitution, Article 34, prescribes that justice will be administered in court by judges appointed in accordance with the Constitution. And that, I think, is a constitutional reflection of there will be a person there who will hear you and apply their skill to what you've told them and reach a decision, whether you agree with it or not, but at least you'll have been heard.
You want that human element there. So I would hope that what we really end up with is something where it's a tool and not an overlord.
Perhaps in the end, AI can be a tool, which, when properly deployed, could assist the process of justice. But it is not something which can ever become a substitute for justice itself. You have been listening to the Irish Courts Podcast, a curious broadcast production with the Court Service and the Judiciary. Thank you to our contributors, Dr. Brian Barry, Miss Justice Eileen Roberts, and Karlin Lillington. Original music score by Jerry Horn.